The reality is like good sales and marketing people should be living surveys. You should always be asking questions, listening, distilling answers, and then applying that to what you're doing.
I don't know how you get into sales. So it's probably more of a therapy session than a podcast episode. But I've always considered helping people make progress, no matter what your role is sales.
If you're managing and running a company, like this is hard work, but the way to get aligned that we always talk about is like the voice of the customer has to win.
And that reshaped how I approached that process. And so early on, what you're actually doing is building trust with the champion, not just from them trusting you, but you trusting them.
Hey, welcome to the Message Market Fit podcast. I'm your host, Chris Silvestri, and if you're new here, this is a show where I chat with B2B SaaS folks in marketing, product, growth, and founders about how they join the conversation already happening in their customers' minds. We dive deep into their thinking, their systems, and their playbooks to see how they empathize with their audience and speak to them in a way that resonates, so they're compelled to take action. Join us and learn how you too can shape your messaging strategy and write copy that truly resonates and differentiates you. I'm super excited about my guests today, Derik Sutton and Kyle Bazzy. Derik is CMO and Kyle is SVP of Customer Success at Autobooks, a business banking platform that simplifies accounting and payments, empowering small businesses to focus on what they do best. In this episode, we chat about the power of the Jobs to be Done framework in product design, marketing, and sales. And we dive into the nuances of demand-side sales in B2B SaaS, especially fintech. Derik and Kyle take us through their personal journeys and share insights on creating alignment across teams and on how their customer-centric approach has revolutionized their strategies. Let's dive right in. Hey guys, thank you so much for being here and welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Doing good, Chris. How you doing?
Great. What about you, Derik?
Doing good, doing really good.
All right. So for today, we got two special guests, very involved with Jobs to be Done, if you're familiar with the methodology. I got a couple of questions, but first, let's start from your background. I know that both of you have very interesting backgrounds in product design. So let's start with Kyle. What's your background? How did you get into sales and SaaS?
Yeah, I don't know how you get into sales. So it's probably more of a therapy session than a podcast episode. But I've always considered helping people make progress, no matter what your role is sales. And so got started in SaaS pretty early on in actually college. Started a mycmu4u.com, which was early days of, kind of geocentric, just gathering and organizing of all the resources and everything at college. I went to Central Michigan University. Terrible student, but fell in love with entrepreneurship and just all things that could be possible with, building software and deploying and building that out. So that's how I got started.
Nice.
Yeah, so I've been working in the kind of financial technology industry, banking industry my whole career. Started really like in a more of a traditional sales, like junior sales role. Migrated into product, love product work. Eventually landed at Autobooks and I was leading product. And then we hired Chris Spiek, who's like way better at product than I ever thought about being. And so, yeah, he now leads product at Autobooks and I shifted over to marketing. And so I'm like I guess like a reformed product person, or I don't know how to classify it, but yeah, I'm a former product person now doing marketing.
Nice. And for listeners who don't know, Chris is the co-founder of the Rewired Group, right? With Bob Moesta, right? So how?
Yeah, they spent like a decade together at Rewired Group,
Yeah.
doing Jobs to be Done consultancy.
Yeah. So I'm super curious. How did this relationship start? Like with Bob Moesta, Chris, how did you get started working together?
Yeah, so our founder, CEO, Steve, Robert, just, just a great guy, but like very intellectually curious and always pushing to get the best out of not only the team, but also the company and like what we're building. And so with that, it just comes like he's always looking to upgrade or top grade talent. Talent wins out. And so he was obsessed with product adoption, retention and usage of the capabilities that we were building at Autobooks. And so he was just going deep on like, how do we solve this problem? How do we get we've got great access to this market. We're going to unlock, all these business owners that are doing their banking inside of a digital banking app. How do we get our capabilities like to them and, get them to use it? And so through that journey, he started to just read and kind of get into and found jobs to be done. The funny story though, and like Steve and Chris have to tell this, but Chris and Steve knew each other for a long time and they'd meet up in certain circles and talk. And like Steve basically always just ignored what Chris was talking about him doing and kind of just wrote it off as like, sounds like some academic BS or like, whatever. And then Chris will basically say, it's like, Steve didn't hear any of that because he really wasn't shopping for what I had to offer at the time. He was in a different frame of mind building his previous company and they were later stage. And, so like it just didn't even get into first thought, with Steve. But once Steve was down that path of trying to make progress on, the adoption problem, all of a sudden the next time he and Chris met, it was, oh wait, like tell me about that thing. And so Steve's shopping and, like going through the timeline basically started to accelerate.
Awesome.
Yeah.
What's your biggest learning from that experience? Like what did you take from that, from the story, and what are you trying to apply now?
Yeah, I'll turn it over to Kyle. I guess I didn't quite finish that. So like we hired Chris. Chris is obviously connected to Bob. That then brings, Bob into like our sphere, if you will. And then like from Kyle's standpoint, so we hired Kyle. I was already at the company, like I said, kind of running product. Chris came in. Now he was like managing growth and user adoption. We ended up transitioning and he took over product. I moved to marketing, but we hired Kyle to run sales. And Bob had started this kind of transition of transferring jobs we'd done to sales and marketing. And he was really looking for, basically like an incubation or an area to go implement demand side sales at a company level, test, measure, learn, and then document that process. So Kyle, I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah. And so, working primarily mostly in my career around, how do we efficiently scale sales processes from, the go-to-market approach. Joining Autobooks was, like Derik was sharing, Steve, our founder or co-founder, founder-led sales. He's an engineer, had already been, signing contracts. And when he contacted me, it was very much around, hey, we got something here. How do we take it to the next level? What frameworks, what processes do we put in place so we can create an environment where, really great salespeople can have a lot of success by, selling our software. And so when I joined, one of the first things that, kind of put us on this journey was learning with what Derik's background was, Chris's background was. I remember when I met Chris in the office next to me and I'm sitting here reading Competing Against Luck again, because I wanted to brush up on it as I joined the company, and recognizing some of his mannerisms in the jobs interviews in the book and going and taking a page and walking to his office and going, is this you? Like I've been reading this book for, 7 years. And so it kind of all came together. And I've always had this on my mind where progress is from the jobs perspective under the lens of building the product. Derik and I partnered up, and I think we both kind of saw it where there was a go-to-market approach here that wasn't really commonly well known. And so that was kind of the start of the journey there. Steve gave us some way to run with it. How do we use this way of how we build the product to help customers progress to extend out? And you asked about one of the learnings there. And I think that kind of the jumping off point was Chris often will refer now to a common language across the organization, right? So you have marketing speaking one way, sales speaking another way, product not only speaking, but building a different way, and almost kind of like, battling and bickering about stuff. And I think that what reflecting back on the last 5 years has been really enlightening around what jobs can do to an organization regarding how you speak to each other and work well together, rooted in the one common language, which is customer. So I think that's kind of a really, really good highlight from what we've learned the last 3 years.
Yeah. The biggest problem that I see with clients as well is that, as you said, sales, marketing, product, they're on three completely separate pages, right? Sometimes for like companies of like a decent size. So how do you see like getting aligned on messaging, on positioning, on what needs to be done to make the product effective and users progress the right way. I'm
Yeah.
interested, especially in how do you get aligned on, yeah, what kind of research do you do, the feedback that you collect from customers, how do you integrate it in the whole company?
Yeah, so I'll say this from the beginning too, like we're not perfect at this and we slip out of this, from time to time. So like if you're managing and running a company, like this is hard work. But the way to get aligned that we always talk about is like the voice of the customer has to win. So like basically just go get insights, go learn from the customer and let the customer voice be heard. Like share the good, share the bad, share the metrics and the impact as well. But if everybody is talking about the customer progress and where we're doing well and where we're not, where we're falling short, then at the end of the day, the customer can win. And like that's something that quite frankly all teams can agree upon. You know, a sales team may not agree with a product team that wants to do a huge refactor of the back end because it's not going to bring any additional functionality to market that they can go talk about, right? But if it's rooted in customer benefit and it's built around language that they can translate to the customer that gives the customer value, then they can get behind that. So I think it's all just rooted in why are we doing things based upon customer feedback and like, you kind of live in that world.
Mm. There was one thing that I read on your LinkedIn, I think, Derek, it was about how you guys come up with survey questions that I think you were referring to. Yeah, sometimes it's not easy to come up with survey questions that provide useful and actionable insights. So the way that you did it and explained it was first conducting customer interviews, and from the interviews using that language to frame the questions, to structure and lay out the survey. Did you see like actual results from doing it this way and from doing it the old way? And what other ways do you use that you implement the customer feedback?
Yeah, so that came from so I have a friend of mine that works. It's actually a church. So he like basically runs the finance group of a church, and they just kind of wanted to survey the congregation about some of their financial habits. And like we've gotten to know each other, and he asked me to help. Like, hey, give him your background. Like, I just love some support here. He's like, this isn't my level of expertise, and so I just kind of told him like, I don't know how to build surveys either. I'll be honest with you. But what I do know how to do is interview customers and understand like where they're at, the progress they're trying to make. That will give me a lot better language around what to ask. And then maybe I can group some themes that we can like center the survey around. That's kind of like where we're at in the process. The interesting thing though is like I've done, 7, 8 interviews now. After those 7 to 8 interviews, I've broken them down. I've met with him. We've reviewed them. And now he's just like, I can't even think about the survey. All I can think about is implementing new tactics and things to go solve these findings. Like he's like, I just can't even see the survey anymore. All I can see is, wow, we could go make these couple of changes and change the member experience. And so I think that to me is the power of, I think it's easy, I'll say this a little bit provocatively. I don't know if I fully mean it. It's kind of like strung up and loosely held, but like, I think surveys are a very easy way for an executive team or a management team that's very unconnected to the market and the customer to be able to go point to something to say, this is what to go do, or this is what people say. And then the thing that Bob's really taught us is the fallacy of a survey is that there are no trade-offs within the survey, meaning that the end person doesn't have to make a trade-off of like actually pulling out their wallet and purchasing anything. They just get to check a box. And so they almost answer surveys a lot of times unintentionally, they lie, because like they'll maybe like reflect a better version of themselves or even a worse version of themselves, depending upon the way the survey is phrased. And so you really don't get the trade-off where the rubber meets the road and they have to make that forcing function decision. The survey doesn't present them with that reality.
Derek, what's an example of that you've deployed? Because you've done some really, really great work on that. Like, what's something that you changed from that process? Like, what's an example there of how you can go about it? If someone's listening to this going like, how do I How do I not use a survey?
Yeah. So just go schedule 3 interviews with customers, and like literally you have to be very careful about not asking and leading the interviewee with specifics about the product or features or anything like that. So there's a Japanese proverb that basically says if you ask the question why 5 times, you'll get to the real answer. And so you have to just ask, like set the thing up, like start asking questions and then ask why. And when they give you an answer, ask why and like keep digging into that until you get like on firm ground. And so when you take and you listen to just 3 interviews right off the rip, your mind will race with opportunity. Then go point the team or yourself at that thing rather than spending the time, effort, and energy to get, survey results. And you really, even, this person that I was talking about at this church, like it's a large congregation. So like, he's like, how do 7 interviews at the beginning? He's like, how do 7 interviews like represent the sample size of like, who all attends? But now we go do 7 interviews and it's like, you don't even think about that anymore. You're like, wow, this is like so enriching and enlightening. So, I mean, hopefully that helps kind of land the plane a little bit, but in a very practical way, that could be, oh, we need to update the header, like the headline image on our website, or hey, here's 3 ideas for email subject lines, or here's 2 slides we're going to change in our sales pitch. That it could be that level of fidelity that helps level up whatever you're working on.
Yeah.
And so, Chris, like one of the things that I think has been very unique in that, Derik and I coming from marketing and sales, the collaboration and partnership. So to extend that out, rather than doing surveys, asking questions that we think are important, getting answers back that, at best are in the ballpark, but at worst are completely off course. The sales team focusing on the reasons why we think like an enterprise customer, in this case, a bank wants to buy, right? We can help you compete with Square. You said that was important. We can help you with payment tools. You don't have the ability to send an invoice and accept the payment inside internet banking. That's all the push, right? And pull that we think is important when the realities that Bob taught us are you sell to the anxieties.
Yeah.
Real sales, if you're focused on the progress of your customer, is that framing really helped me shift my mindset from, hey, what's on the website in the old world, right? Old way, new way. Old way was surveys responding to here's features and benefits rich websites, to the new way of what they're truly not only looking to make progress on, but how does a customer frame and what words do they use, right? Contrasted now to the sales motion, which extends that further, right? So being easy to install and look at how we integrate in your internet banking platform that allows you to offer this feature was something that kind of nuance, I think, is a good example of how that change from Derik using a survey from the marketing side, extended out into the sales deck and, why customers chose us more and faster and better, over the years.
Hey, Chris, you want to phrase like here's maybe the podcast thing, like here's the clip,
Cold
but
open.
like the reality is like good sales and marketing people should be living surveys. Like you should always be asking questions, listening for, like distilling answers and then applying that to what you're doing. So Kyle, why don't you tell the story of like our first conference together? Like we kind of live that out, right? Like we became the living survey. So, for the background for everybody listening, like we're a B2B company. It like for the first part of our business. So like we've got to go sell and basically convince financial institutions to implement Autobooks, which we do digital invoicing, online payment acceptance, tap to pay on iPhone, like basically help business owners get paid. And then we have an accounting bookkeeping service as well. And so we have to convince a bank to like tell us, like turn us on for their customers. And then we have to convince their end customers to use those capabilities inside digital banking and continue to use those versus Square or PayPal. So Kyle, maybe tell the story about our first conference together in a B2B setting, questions, conversations, and then how that kind of like led to some activity for us.
Yeah. So to set the stage here, I won't confess, or I should say profess, that I like Derik. He is a marketer. I am a sales guy. We both have our roots, but I will say that I have come to enjoy his work. And so back in the day, well, all jokes aside, we launched our first conference. We're going down this new path, so to speak, on creating our go-to-market approach through the jobs framework. Derik has this idea to strip away pretty much all of the things that you would think are at a conference. This conference, just to, kind of help frame this up, is all bank executives, 1,300 bank executives. And so as the new VP of sales, I'm sitting here saying this is one of the best opportunities of the year. And the approach that we were taking away from the old way, big booth, flashy things all over the place. After we did a few jobs interviews and really kind of just throwing caution to the wind, saying, if we ask the right questions, will it lead to the right conversations? And so, Derik, kind of talked to me about like, how did we set that booth up? Right. Cause I think that's part of the story as we went in, and it was just him and I at the time. So very, two-man kind of band, kind of, going into this, and very, I'll say, ill-equipped compared to sales conferences or any conferences I've gone to in the past when I'm trying to engage current prospects and drum up new ones, looking over to my marketer and saying, hey, what the hell are we doing here? So Derek,
Be-
kind of like talk to me about like,
Before
what did you
before you
do
go,
going into
Derik,
there?
Please tell me that you set up your booth as a criminal interrogation setup and started interrogating people on their jobs to be done.
Not too far from that. So we basically, as Kyle said, it's 1,300 banking executives. These are like CEOs, directors of banks. So I know you're in the UK, but in the
Mhm.
US, we have a lot of banks. We have way more than you all do. So we have, something close to like 10,000 financial
Wow.
institutions. And so at this specific event, it's all the banking executives. They're there to like look at, hear from the industry, make decisions on technology, et cetera. So we basically just have like a, a 6-foot table with a Autobooks tablecloth on it, a few pens, and a very crappy, I'll just say, like, award thing that we'd won. Like, not crappy that we won the award, but like the display and presentation of it was awful.
Mm.
We probably had 3 or 4 different sales collateral things that just almost like the marketing or like the people that I had on the team at the time just kind of threw in the booth, like just like we've used these in the past. And so they're just kind of laying around. But we have a huge TV display. And we'd already done interviews and we knew we felt like we knew the jobs of the financial institutions at this time. And so we just put 3 questions on the TV display. That's all we had. So we didn't have like a background to our booth or anything. We just had 3 questions. And we'd rotate through some questions, but they were questions that we had through other presentations had put up on PowerPoint slides and like led off with. So we had some level of confidence that like these were good. And so we just had 3 questions up and we would just wait for banking executives to like stop and look at the questions and then engage with us. So like it wasn't like Kyle in the aisle, just doing like grabbing
Smile.
people and forcing a conversation. When they came up, it wasn't like, hey, this is Autobooks, this is what we do. And it wasn't like our elevator pitch, like everybody says. So we would basically just sit there and just have a banker look at these questions. And if they engage, like, oh, what do you guys do? We would say, what do you think we do? And we would just sit there and be okay in that uncomfortable silence. And then Kyle would say something like, which of those questions are you like wrestling with the most?
And I think that the contrast here, right, Chris? So I'm a new VP of sales, charged with selling this fintech. I walk up and objectively, this is not only the most lacking, to say it a nice way, booth at the conference, but probably that I've ever been a part of since I was 17 and setting this up myself at my first conference. Yet the focus of the old way, right, the things we think are important versus putting 3 simple questions from jobs interviews on the screen and having CEOs of multi-billion-dollar banks, Chris, they walk the middle of the aisle. Like they don't want to get too committed to somebody because then the sales guy walks up and they feel like you have to be nice and you got to talk to them, right? So they walk the middle of the aisle. And anyone that sold at a B2B conference knows what I'm talking about. And so the salespeople are trying to catch eyes, and it's just this odd social situation. Instead, Derik and I sat here and said, don't come talk to us, right? If you can't figure out why you want to talk to us based on the screen, we're not ready for you. And that was our mindset. We weren't saying that a lot, obviously. And so then I remember the first CEO that walked up, he happened to be one of my key targets for the conference, right? The old way of how I used to approach sales. And he walked up and said, that's something I need to solve. How the heck do you guys do it? Right? He didn't care about the booth around it. Like it struck me nerves. Right. And so, if you think about how we often have approached the conference environment, right? With the fishbowl and the business cards and give a tchotchke away and get a business card so I can pound the phone and follow up after. Now through the interviews and their wording from the customers we spoke to, we were connecting with people who had no idea what Autobooks was from Detroit, which they assumed was something to do with like mortgages or auto financing, right? And now through 3 questions, all the tchotchkes, all the flyers, all of the, hey, come check out our booth, pre-interviews and LinkedIn messages. None of it mattered. What mattered was when they saw it in that glimpse amongst 50 other booths, that connected with them because it spoke to them. And so I think that was where I said, okay, I think we're onto something, right? And so the rest of the conference went, people are standing around our booth, other executives are bringing other banks up to us because they're buddies and they talk less than over a beer about it. And it just really hit home for me. It's like, that's the foundational setting to do all of the other ancillary things that are beneficial, but if in a creative, yet if you don't get this part right, it makes it a lot more difficult or a lot easier for your outcomes.
Yeah. So I think the big takeaway for the audience, what we would just simply convey is that, using questions like understanding customer demand, like you have to understand that first. You got to do the work. You got to do the interviews. You've got to understand the demand. Like what progress are they trying to make? That demand can lead you into the questions that they're asking themselves at stages of that timeline. And then questions are great in first thought, passive looking, mainly in first thought. So the reason that questions are great in first thought is because questions are places in the brain in which you have to place an answer. And that comes from Clayton Christensen. And so if you're in a conference area and a bunch of people are like screaming feature benefits at you, or, like these loud branded logos, you don't have to answer anything to that. You actually have the like more ability in your brain to just tune it out. If somebody puts a question, you have to answer that intuitively. Now, it doesn't mean you have to engage, but you have to answer that question. You have to think about it. And so that's what we found attractive is like these questions can be a very attractive force. And so for marketers, listening, questions early on in copy, questions early on in PowerPoint presentations, questions on a website derived through, progress customers are trying to make are a very effective tool for drawing people in and really getting them into a conversation about the value that you create or offer them as a benefit.
Yeah. Yeah. Now that people are going to listen to the podcast, and soon we're all going to be at conference, like silent conferences with TVs and screens and questions on. But I'm super curious. So, and obviously it's not any question, right, that works. You need to identify the questions that resonate and you see a reaction from the interviewee. So what was it like for you? When was the moment or the moments that you realized, okay, these are the 3 specific questions that we need to ask? What were the telltale signs?
I'll say from the sales side, right? At the time, it was a player kind of coach role for me, VP of sales, but also doing a lot of the selling with a few sales, people under me. We were getting, anywhere from 4 to 10 demo, old world demos at bats a day. And once you started asking the questions, it was very early on from the sales side because you would just identify champions or deck sponsors or people are, on those early calls in a sales process to say, that's the exact question I'm asking myself, or we were asking ourselves at the bank, or, fill in the blank kind of customer type if, you're not selling to banks, obviously. I think from the sales perspective, it was very early on for that reason. And, actually, for anyone listening to the podcast, from the sales side and the marketing side, you might be sitting there as a salesperson going, yeah, but like you got Derik, how the heck am I going to get my marketer to even want to pick up my call? And I think that it's a very important, it's important to understand their progress too. Derik and I didn't align to this. We were both given a different goal and found a way to accelerate that by helping, each other out and ultimately those goals. So I think that from that perspective, looking at it from what are they asking themselves? That was just a simple takeaway for me to say, I don't need to recreate the wheel here. Don't force them to ask the question if they're not, but if they are asking the question, that it's a light bulb moment very quickly on. It will prove out in your metrics in terms of, sales velocity and close conversion rate and things like that. But going up funnel, I mean, Derik is someone that also saw the way and would jump on sales calls with us and see that too. So I think that, it's a missed opportunity for sales and marketing teams not to collaborate on those calls because you can iterate, test, and learn quickly and very specific and focus on something that, is challenging or is a big opportunity at the org.
Yeah.
I don't know how you guys did on the marketing side.
Yeah, I think what you're illuminating is great. So, obviously you got to do the work of the interview. You've got to come up with, what you believe is the demand or the job. And from there, you should have some questions and some things that you've heard from clients or from prospects or customers about, the progress they're trying to make. What were some of the key questions, that help them kind of get from one step to the next, et cetera. And then, to Kyle's credit and his team, like once we had that, they they ran with it. He was putting it in presentations. He was leading with it. He was really bought in to say during a sales call, like the traditional sales call is like, company intro, you got like the company branded slide, you've got the intros, you got like our titles and what we do. And then like 20 minutes later, you get into like, and here's the features we offer you and all this kind of stuff. Right. But he really, dove into like, hey, hey, I'm, Kyle, we're the Autobooks team. We've sent you intros ahead of time, like, read those on your own. Here's 3 questions. Like, which of these are you guys, like if you had to pick one and answer it, like what's the most important question to answer for your financial institution? And that takes a lot of commitment, because he has, quota dollars on the line, et cetera. So he dove all in. So it was like, to answer your question, Chris, we felt good about the research that we had done, but we then had to further test that research in market live with customers. We couldn't just like blindly, hey, these are it and never change it. Like we ended up with iterations of it, And so like nothing's ever perfect per se, but it's, the good thing about a question, I believe, when you're working in a sales environment is that it starts to help the prospect understand that you've done the work and you don't expect them to have to do everything, versus if you just give them a bunch of like pamphlets about your products and features and capabilities and like turn it over to them, it's then up to them to figure out how that applies to the questions being asked of them internally. Versus if we can get deep and understand the questions being asked internally, provide all the needed answers and information and documentation, man, like how much easier do we make it on the life of a champion to like move this decision through the organization? And like once you do that a couple of reps, like it starts to get like you're starting to ski downhill at that point because you're able to move, decisions through because you're already anticipating what the next step is.
Chris, from a messaging perspective, can we touch on like maybe a 201 or 301 lesson here?
Sure.
So when you're selling it to, this is maybe specific to B2B, right, in enterprise, but when we're selling to banks, one of the questions the salesperson's actually answering without it being asked. So say that again. Question we're answering without it being asked by your champion specifically is, will I advance my career if this project gets done and then i.e. becomes successful or not, right? And so what we learned was, and this is something I remember one of the early sessions or dinners or whiteboard sessions with Bob years ago, Derik, I asked him a question that I've never been able to get a good answer for, at least opposite to that point, which was, do you look at the customer journey or, a la sales process and sales pipeline from a one kind of dimensional perspective of the company? And he cut me off before I said the second part, which was, no, you look at it from where the individuals are at, from like your key players, your champion, your key sponsor, any detractors, like maybe a CFO or something like that, as well as the organization. And that reshaped how I approached that process. And so early on, what you're actually doing is building trust with the champion, not just from them trusting you, but you trusting them, right? Am I going to invest my time here when I have other areas or other deals that I could be working on? And so that, I think that what we found early on was like, hey, this person's going to make or break their career, or at the very best has to take a chance on us and has downside that they're worried about. Like, if this doesn't go well, it's on me. I won't get the promotion. I can't go to another bank and get a better title because I don't have a project to point to. For us, small business was also emerging as a new category in banking at the time. Long talked about, long underserved, but now actually being invested in. And people were trying to advance their own progress. And that often became, especially early on, more important for the sales process, which when you lead with questions rather than acting like you know everything. We all know, Dale Carnegie, how to influence people and win friends or whatever. It all comes through more of a conversational, and people on the other end of the phone care about themselves. Whether or not we are like conscious of it, we're all selfish. And like, you start asking questions, I'm asking myself, and we're long friends of, birds of a feather kind of thing. And so that was a really key point. And from a sales perspective, that really helped us level up our approach to it all.
Yeah, I love it. Super interesting, especially because something that personal for these people, I suspect it's also not easy to admit, right? So that, I don't know, that their career is in jeopardy, maybe because this decision's on the line for everything. So how are you able to dig that out of these people, or you're just presenting them or addressing that potential question beforehand so that you see how they resonate with it?
Kyle, you probably have more experience working with the business champions than I do on this, so I'll let you take that one.
Yeah, Chris, I missed the last part. How do they what?
Yeah, how do you dig that personal experience out of these people? Do you address that point like beforehand, before they mention anything, or I don't know, you have a couple of points they try to hit
Yeah.
so that they address it?
So I think that one, you have to breed a culture first and foremost that empowers people talking to champions, prospects, whatever it might be, to be radically honest, right?
Mm,
And so one of the things that, a tool that we deploy that's very common, something called MAP, or what we call, I should say, mutually agreed action plan. Lay it out. Like, this is what success looks like. We can talk about alignment and all that, but how do you know you're ready for success, right? Talk to me about why now. And I think that, we can talk about tactics and tooling and all of that, but the reality is, do you breed that culture early on with those champions? And I think a lot of people fear that. And I understand it. It's a human element to fear pushing back on someone I just made 50 calls, no one answered. You're going to tell me on the 51st call that I'm on the phone with, and like I should be pushing back on them to not purchase. So I get why it's counterintuitive, but what you're really looking for when you focus, or at least you are making progress directionally towards jobs to be done, and thinking about not a contract being signed, but successful value being extracted from whatever you sold, right? The whole progress versus sales. And in the thing that I would really just encourage people on listening to this is that when you go down that route, it might not be, smooth sailing to begin with. It might be pretty bumpy, but you'll end up turning champions into such better customers for you. The sales process goes faster. Why? They trust you. So that goes wrong, they're in a meeting, they text you because they know you're not going to convince them. They know that you're going to listen and help them unpack other ways of doing it, other ways to think about it. And Derek nailed it. Like, asking questions is the effective language to help them through that. The other thing I would just kind of give a pro tip on is offer optionality, right? So, Jobs teaches us, and Bob is in the back of my head saying, contrast creates meaning. And so when you think about a sales pursuit and you sit here and say, this isn't the only way, you can do it this way. You can choose this provider. Let's talk about the trade-offs that exist there. I've read every book that came out in sales, from consultative sales to challenger sale and all that. There's all very, very useful, obviously, frameworks and philosophies there. But when you're aligned to how do we advance the ball to create a successful client versus sign a contract, I think that there's some very, key parts of that just really stick out and make sense. How do you earn the trust of the champions to know that you're actually trying to do that is what your question's really getting at, I think.
yeah, I have another question, especially when it comes to connecting with people deeply. I know that both of you have a lot of experience in fintech, right? And I was wondering, like, to me, one of the biggest aspects of being able to write good copy, effective messaging, is also empathizing with customers. So I was wondering, how does empathy play in this whole marketing and sales approach for you? And how do you develop and make sure that the whole team empathizes with customers?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I think it's a good question. I think people say that in interviews, that's a good question because it's like something you want to answer, you know what I mean? It's like you relate to it.
Yeah, that's
So,
good.
All
I
your
don't
other
know
questions were
the question,
bad.
but I think
That
it's a
one was
great
good.
topic and yeah, something I'm interested in. So yeah, that's a great question. So empathy. So I think it's this, and I was kind of almost going to jump in on Kyle at the end there, but empathy, I think, is one of the most underutilized tools in sales, especially enterprise sales, because everybody feels like you have to maintain this level of professionalism and this guard and this distance between yourself and an enterprise like prospect or a client. Things have to be buttoned up, and you can't possibly, like Kyle like came in and like started to gather people's phone numbers, prospects, and texting them and having his team do it. And like got into like, texting relationships on an enterprise sale. Like that doesn't happen a lot. And so what that does is it builds that level of empathy, Chris, where you start to like that starts to break down a certain wall, right? And when you're around people, like I think I probably do make some people on our team a little bit nervous because like in a professional setting, like I'm okay with like maybe saying something a bit uncomfortable or joking or, saying something a little bit lighthearted because at the end of the day, like we're all just humans. And like just because you're sitting on the other side of the desk doesn't mean that you're not like thinking about your kids or like have stress about, an upcoming, family decision or, all the things that we deal with, right? Like, so I think just having an antenna and a receptor up to like having the empathy that people are people. And at the end of the day, we could probably debate But like what really matters, with this enterprise level decision here, if one of us all of a sudden gets in a health crisis, like, are we really going to care about this deal flow? Or am I going to be like, man, like, I can't believe John's got cancer, like or am I going to go back and like just gripe about like my champion? He's got freaking cancer. That's one off my pipeline. Like, what kind of person does that? So empathy though comes from like really caring about at the end of the day, the thing that you're basically selling into somebody or offering up to them, does it really enrich and improve their life and the value of their company? And does it accrete that value? And if you can feel good about that and stand behind it, then I would encourage you, as a sales or marketer, like be okay, like getting to know people. And they may not want you to like, there may be some levels of like connection that you can gain with them. But if you at least understand, like, and this is what I love about Kyle and them, like the motivations and intention of, is this like career building for this individual? Or is this like career maintaining? Is this like, is there risk here because their entire business unit is on the chopping block? Are certain team members or key people that are needed to make this project a success, are they flight risk to like go somewhere else in the org if this doesn't work? And like understanding and being around that, and like really then speaking into that from a very like stand up way and not like trying to use that information in a coercive, a negatively coercive way. I think that's the superpower. Right. And so just, it's never been easier to just stay at your desk and use chat GPT and like not connect with people. It's never been easier. You can also be more productive, arguably you could be more productive because there's more output. But I can tell you this, every time I freaking get out of the office and go talk to customers and people, it always makes me better. It always makes my work better. It always makes the output for our team better. And so you just got to do it, you just got to do it.
And people forget that we all think of work-life balance, but people forget that we work 8 hours out of the whole day, which is a lot, right? So your work, in a sense, is part of you as a person, right? So you have to have been able to blend all that in when you have these conversations. There was another point where we were talking about surveys. First, I'm glad that you didn't tell your friend to go and use ChatGPT to come up with the questions. But other than that, I'm curious about, because a lot of the research that we do, yeah, you can get customers, like recent customers that have a fresh perception of their buying experience, their decision-making process. But oftentimes in a survey, for example, you can ask, you can tell them, let's go back to the moment that you bought. Tell me, why did you do this and that? And I know the Bob in the book has a great framing sentence that he uses. It's something like, pretend that we're shooting a documentary about your life. I'm going to ask you weird questions. So what's the situation frame for them to imagine the situation? I was wondering, how do you do that? How do you make sure that you rewind the time back for them and they are accurate in their insights?
Yeah, I don't, Kyle, I'll let you jump in. I don't know that there's like a silver bullet answer here. I think it basically just comes down to doing the work and like getting comfortable doing interviews and coming up with your own process. And so I think the documentary thing works well for some people. Myself, like Chris, I've been doing some interviews recently, and like, I haven't used that line as an intro. I'm like, hey, we're just here to learn about you and like your journey, your banking journey. I'd love to just ask you some questions and just go deep on that. You mind if I just get started? And that's a way to start it. So I think it's more about the prescriptive way you set it up in the question, but it's more about like the permission that you say, hey, I'm just going to ask some questions. And then how, when you're asking the questions, what's your process to build the timeline of activity and make sure you're filling in all the gaps. And Chris and I will be publishing some of these interviews, and he's a master at this. He's way better at this than I am, but it's just being like a dog on a bone with, I don't feel like I don't have it all here, right? Like this gap in time or this portion in time, like I've heard it, but I feel like it's surface level. I need to go deeper and like constructing and looking at that timeline and be like, I think this tells the story. It's, you don't know it until you see it. Well, that's the only way I can describe it. Kyle, I don't know if you have better language than
No,
that.
I think that was really well said. The other thing that I've learned a lot about through Chris is that it's also important being picked. A lot of people will want to pick their best customers that have been with over 8 years. They have no memory of why they chose them that long ago. And now all the context of where you're at today as a company creeps into their answers because they want to help you. So I think that before you even get in, who you're choosing is very important to be able to get down to the root of what you're looking for.
Yeah, pro tip. If you're working in an environment, and we had this happen recently within the past year, don't interview the CEO's favorite client.
Yeah.
Don't interview the CEOs. Just say you're starting this and you go partner with the company. They have their sales, marketing, they bring their CEO in because you need to get alignment with everybody. Don't go pick their favorite client that they worked intimately with because you'll never convince them that they didn't just buy because of them. Like it would, no, they bought because of me as the CEO in their mind. You can't convince them that they
Otherwise,
didn't. Yeah, you can't convince them otherwise. So never pick the CEO's pet client. That's a pro tip.
Yeah. Speaking of alignment, one last couple of questions actually want to be mindful of your time. When it comes to research, all the teams, especially non-leadership teams, struggle to get budget for research. So you being like a leadership position, how would you advise these teams to being able to get that budget for research and being able to make it a consistent practice?
yeah, I'll be provocative here, Derek. We had
Yeah.
$0 budget to do it before. And even to this day, in this environment, especially for fast, high growth companies, interviews can be free. You can offer little things, but the amount of value you'll be able to create after 3, 5, especially up to the threshold that we try to get to 10 interviews. Whether you're starting a company, whether you're building a product, whether you're trying to solve a problem, interviews are quote unquote free from a hard dollar perspective. And the ROI on it will take you so very far before you then can justify more budget to maybe do more of a robust approach. So don't get me wrong, we've spent money on things, but after 5 years, I look at it and say, there hasn't been more value added to what we were doing, how we were doing it, what direction we were headed in, more than these interviews over the years. And I would say that don't complicate it. Don't be stuck in the old way of how research has been done. Maybe make that aspirational and think about it as when we can get there versus don't make an excuse. You don't need $0. You don't need a budget to be able to go learn the things that you actually need to learn.
Yeah, I actually fully agree with that, but I'll offer it a little bit of a different lens because I want to be, Chris, empathetic to people in other situations. So say I'm somebody on a team, like a corporate team, and I'm really bought into this, but I'm just one member of a team. Maybe I'm a junior member of the team. Maybe I haven't been there very long. And I do need to convince other people that we should maybe bring in an outside firm to help like augment this. I can only do so much. There's also something to be said for, hey, if an expert tells us something, we're going to believe it more so than an internal person, right? So there's a lot of dynamics there. So let's say you're the new person, you've been at this company for a year, you really want to go do this, you want to go build the business case to go build the budget. Go take Kyle's advice. Go do the 2, 3, 4 interviews on your own for free. Distill it down, take the learnings, implement in something. Like maybe you change some emails. Maybe you're on the product team and you update something in the UX or what have you. Document the results, show the before and after, and then use that to build the business case to the team to say, hey, I'm just one person. I don't even know this deeply, but I think it can offer value. I talked to 3 customers. This is what I heard. This is what I learned. This is what I implemented. This was the before. This was the after. Hey, do you think it'd be a good idea if we went deeper on this? Right. So like basically taking Kyle's advice, go do a little bit of the work yourself. Like you want budget, you want to go prove it. Okay, go. I think Chris, you commented on my LinkedIn post, go get your hands dirty, right? Go do the work yourself. It'll make you better when you bring in the company to go do the thing. You could actually become and rise and maybe be the lead of the project. It may be a career advancing opportunity for you. It could be something that like people point to, man, thank goodness Chris did that. And who knows? So it's not just about bringing somebody in to go have them do the work for you. Go do a little bit of the work yourself and then bring in experts potentially to make you better at doing the thing that you think is great. And then take that thing, that new skill, and spread it throughout your organization. Like that, to me, that's what the advice I'd give to a young person or somebody trying to get this in their org.
Yeah, that's awesome. And going back to personal motivations, this would be a perfect way to advance your career, as we were talking about before. So I definitely recommend it. Last question is a bit of self-coaching that I like to ask. And it's, what is your biggest challenge right now when it comes to connecting and speaking to customers? And if you were advising someone how would you, what would you tell them to solve it?
In speaking, connecting and speaking to customers.
Yeah, speaking and messaging to customers, connecting in general with them.
I want to think on that one, Derik. I look at the answer off the top of your head. That's a good one.
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge we have right now is I think this is it. Our industry is becoming more saturated with fintech options for financial institutions. So financial institutions have never had more optionality when it comes to different fintech services they can plug in and operationalize inside of their financial institution. And so right now, whereas maybe a couple of years ago when we were leading the market and we were the ones making it the easiest to basically be able to turn on, implement, and go to market, because of the work we did with some of our partners, they've now implemented and made it easy. Like they basically implemented those same tactics with other fintech partners. And so now our future potential customers have more optionality. So what I'm having to think through and go through is how do I stand out? So like a different thing. So all the things still exist about what we used to say, but how do I help convince financial institutions for the right reasons that our project should be prioritized over another project? And so I think that goes back to having a deeper level of understanding about the progress that financial institutions trying to make, ensuring that we align towards their progress, whether that be like deposit growth, non-interest fee income growth, whatever. Like I'm like purposely using like very technical banker terms to say, you're not curing an invoicing solution, you're procuring a way to grow small business customer deposits. And then but like basically let our stuff stand on its own against somebody that's selling AI or a supply of features or capabilities that the financial institution may not yet be able to connect to a causal result that they care about.
Yeah. So I got a different challenge that we're faced today versus 4 or 5 years ago when Derik and I started this. Back then, it was transitioning from founder-led sales to figuring out how do we sell a lot more, a lot faster with a sales team and marketing codified process. Today, we have lots of customers, but we still every year we all go through the same process of the key metrics for next year. How are we going to hit it within this budget and things like that? But now we have all types of customers that'll tell us all types of things. And so there's a really great book out there called The End of Average, which is essentially saying your customer classification, right? We all hear the ICP, ideal customer profile, who you choose to focus on at a different maybe scale and stage as you start to gain a lot more customers over the years is equally as important, right? And I think that's been a brand new challenge for us is if we ask everybody in the whole, we won't find an answer that at least that we're looking for. However, if we understand who's our ideal and believe and trust in how that ripples out into everybody else, I think that's really key and critical. So to wrap it back to the beginning where Derik talked about, are they willing to make trade-offs? So Chris is very famous around the office for saying bitching ain't switching. And so when you ask a bunch of people that are your customers a question, especially if you're not thin slicing the nuance in the context of who has the real need and will show up to make that change in their life, no matter how small or big, I think that's been a different challenge for us nowadays in how we make decisions, how we analyze data, how we choose the email list to send an email survey to or a question to, so on and so forth down the line.
Awesome, guys. Thank you so much. I just gave you some homework indirectly, so hopefully you have something to work on. But that's been awesome. Thank you so much. It's been a masterclass. And thank you so much and speak soon. Thank you so much for listening to the pod. I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you did, the best thing you could do to support the show and help me as a small business owner would be to leave a review. Head over to Apple Podcasts or Spotify and let me know what you think. If you don't want to miss future episodes, subscribe, and if you have any feedback, questions, or suggestions for future episodes, just hit me up on LinkedIn at Christopher Silvestri or Twitter at SilvestriChris. Speak to you next time.